I'm going to trip one time during the sermon. So I must admit, I'm feeling kind of Jewish today. Well, we've talked about the fact that Jesus was Jewish. And when he died, he was Jewish. In fact, he was a very Orthodox Jew. Loved being in the temple and teaching in the temple. But then after Jesus died, his followers didn't know what to do, so they began kind of splitting up into groups. There was the people that followed Paul and the people that followed Peter. And then as time went on, they had groups and they wrote creeds and regulations and who's in and who's out, who can come in and who can't. And I'm still stunned today at so many different kinds of Christians, and so many of the churches believe so many different things. And I'm also stunned sometimes because the church and religion is not quite as important as it used to be for a lot of people. In fact, going to church is okay, which it is. It's a free country, And well, anyway, there's a rabbi named Moshe Wolf, and he is the chaplain of the Chicago Police Department. And they have a magazine that comes out every month, and he writes an article and tells a true story about something that happens in his life and his ministry, and he thinks it'll speak to those of us. And so this week I read one of his stories, and he just writes so beautifully. But it's a true story about a young kid named Brandon who one Saturday morning wanted to get up early and make his parents pancakes, just to surprise them when they came down in their jammies, and he'd have pancakes all ready for them. So he gets in the kitchen and he gets the flour out of the pantry, and he kind of spills the flour on the floor, but that's okay. And he got some milk, and then he put some eggs in there, and he's kind of stirring it up and making a mess on the counter, and the cat gets up on the counter and tips over the dish, and the eggs go all over the floor. So he's on his hands and knees trying to wipe it up, and wouldn't you know, he looks up, and there's his dad in the kitchen doorway. And he is ready to get grounded or to be yelled at. And the dad, I could just picture it, the dad walks right into the middle of the mess. He steps in the eggs and the flour. He looks at his son, and he just grabs him and picks him up, and he hugs him. And he just didn't have to say a word. He just embraced the mess. And the rabbi said, this is kind of what God does for us. There are times when we make a mess out of something. It might even be a relationship. It might be our job. Maybe you've planned for months for a big event, and it just doesn't turn out the way it is. And somehow in life, God scoops us up and holds us. And instead of blame, instead of anger, there's somehow a sense that, okay, it's a mess, but there's life on the other side of the mess, and we'll get that through together. And sometimes that's where we meet God. And sometimes the way we handle the mess of ourselves or somebody else is the way people discover exactly who God is and how God works in the world. Just another little example. Most of my examples are little. We just got the church carpeted, almost. And I remember the owner, just an older Polish fellow, and he's just a delightful man. But the first day he apologizes, I didn't realize it would take us the whole day to get the old carpet up. It was just really, really tough. And so we're behind schedule. And I'm behind schedule every day, no big deal. But then the next day he comes into my office and he says, Don, we got a problem. And I said, I don't mean to preach at you, but I just got back from the hospital with a family whose dad is dying. They got a problem. My buddy, Father Vasil, down the block at the Ukrainian church, he has family in Ukraine. They got a problem. Okay, what's our problem? He said, well, I did make some mistakes, I guess, in the measurement, and I don't have enough carpet to finish the job. I'll have to come back next week to do the altar. And I said, well, and he said, I'm going to put a special cover on it so it looks nice for. I said, no, you're not. I mean, just, God's still here. It looks okay. We'll be fine. And then he said, do you always treat people this nice? And I said, what do you mean? Aren't you supposed to be that way? I mean, what's the point? And it was just kind of interesting to watch the dialogue and the way he felt about the way it was handled. Because life is about perspective. And so often my problems become more important than your problems. But no, life is about stepping back and looking at the world around us and handling ordinary people with ordinary jobs, doing ordinary work with a sense of grace and a sense of goodness. And it's like Caitlin read in the gospel today. Jesus says, you are my people. You are like salt. You bring taste to the world. You spice it up. And you are light to the world. Your job is to be a light unto others. That when somehow there's a mess and things go wrong, instead of blaming somebody or being angry and seeing who's better than somebody else, be a light of hope to those around you. That's what life is about. That's where God lives. I love that Jewish theology. But it's not Jewish theology, and it's not Christian theology. It's human theology. It's the way we're called to live when God's Spirit and the human spirit collide, and out pops goodness and grace and the strength to move on. I have a classmate from high school. God, that's been like 55 years ago. Haven't seen her since high school. But she lives in Maui. And somehow, when I mentioned about praying and the love bucket being for Maui, she must have seen it somewhere. And she said, on Facebook, she said, I'm okay, and my daughter's okay. Where she works is gone, but please thank your congregation for praying for us and giving us hope. And she said, make sure they know that we're grateful. And that little drop of grace in the middle of that incredible mess in Maui, that's where God embraces them and embraces us and lets people know that we're miles and miles apart, maybe 56 years apart, but we're somehow connected by that collision of God's Spirit and the human spirit. It's a mess over there in Maui, but the sun will rise and will give them hope. And there's also a little Jewish boy named Brandon who's going to make pancakes again for his parents someday. Amen. If you're able to, please rise for the creed.